statement. Right. So if we were wanting to really understand, we can do our positive imagery, we can do our positive self-talk, we can have our goal statements and all that. But the truth is, if I don't really understand the design, then even when I'm trying to come up with an image, it might feel good partially, but I want to know, as the mover or the teacher, I want to know that what I'm expressing to them is based on proper function. So embodying function enhances function, right? Like if I actually know what's going on. So we're going to get into some anatomy stuff now. And let's start with just a really basic question, which again, input would be great. Do you know why you have a spine? It's a basic thing. And why do I have it? What's its purpose? So if I looked at anything else, like my car, my house, whatever, my keys, if I don't even know why I have these, then maybe you're not going to use them for their proper purpose. So what would be the purpose of having a spine? Why do you need one? Anybody want to? You'd miss it if it was gone, right? So yeah, so stand upright and connects brain to the rest of the body. Absolutely, yeah. So you can even just say head to pelvis, right? Even though some people would say pelvis is still spine, and I'm kind of one of them because it's going on in the sacrum there. Yeah, so it's a connecting thing between the head. We don't have our heads sitting on our legs. Okay, so it's a connector. What else does your spine do for you?
It supports the torso, which contains our organs.
Yes, absolutely. We need a nice, good, solid structure for all of our internal organs to attach to. Okay, so your heart's attached to your spine through some ligaments and whatnot. We know how the lungs are. They're inside the supportive and protective rib cage. So you don't like bang into something and go, oops, pop the lung. Like you need to have that protection, those internal organs. So it's attachment points for internal organs and muscles. Muscles need attachment points to be able to create the movement. Anything else?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gail.
No, I was just thinking, basically, it facilitates all sorts of movement for the rest of the arms and legs as well, and to be able to turn the upper body against the lower body, for example. The spine facilitates that. It's a bit obvious, really, maybe.
It's okay. We're saying some of the obvious here. Yeah. So
I suppose without a spine, you would just collapse, wouldn't you?
Perhaps, yeah. Would you? I mean, would your head just sit on your legs? I don't know. Some weird alien creature where you've got your head down to your leg. Yeah. And again, yeah, you'd go, where would all these internal organs go, and where's the structure to support all those? Let's also remember, I'll throw a few in there for the sake of time, even of going, yes, it gives postural support and movement. Don't forget, it protects the spinal cord. That's a big one. So the design of the bony structure, right? You've been thinking of versus like some just only little soft tissue tube or something. We actually want the bony structure to protect the spinal cord. And another big one, if we were to be that alien creature that had its head on its legs, we would be giving ourselves like shaken brain syndrome because we need the shock absorption to protect our delicate brain from rattling around in our skull. So shock absorption is a big one. So if you think about it, it's got a very diverse job. It needs to be a solid support, but have all this movement. It needs to be able to absorb shock, but be structured enough to have everything attached to it. So it's kind of like the two sides of the same coin type of job that we're asking our spine to do. And what I've found often for myself, we're seeing it in others, is we tend to sometimes focus on one to the exclusion of the other, when the design was to do both. And that's what makes it really unique. Okay, so movement. Let's look at movement. That's kind of what we're here for as well. So joints, the term joint is generally referring to a place where there's the potential for movement. And I say potential because not all joints and people always move. We can have some joints that are hung out there for 10 years and not moved, right? Somehow you're just carrying them around, but you haven't really used them yet. And I'm talking feet and spine, actually. So if we include your ribs, your spine has about 100 joints, like over 100 joints. That's amazing. That's a lot of potential for movement. And just so you know, from the Franklin method perspective, we also talk about joints as being anywhere where movement is possible. And we don't just limit it to a bone on bone, you know, cartilage covering, all that stuff. The typical synovial joints out there, we can look at muscles being able to slide over top of each other. And if they were adhered and sticky, you know, maybe the fascia sticky, that muscle joint, if you want to call it that, or we call them functional joints, if that was sticky, then that wouldn't be working. I think that happens a lot in the shoulders and shoulder blade area, that there's some stuff sticking down in there, and you're not able to say glide and slide the way we might want to. Okay, so when you look at joints, what do you know about the true joints, the synovial joints? What do you know about them? Anything you want to share? Just make sure you unmute if you want to share. What do they need? Actually, so the big question hanging out there is, what do they need in order to be healthy and happy? You're like, good question.
Well, apart from the muscles supporting them and helping them to move, then there must be, you know, some sort of padding, shall we say, like the bursa between the two parts of the joint, or however many parts of the joint there are. So it's the bones aren't hitting each other. They've got that padding between them, to use a not very technical word.
Yes, that's okay. Yeah. Yeah, they need, yeah, you don't want to have the bone on bone, right? The bone on bone is when it hurts. Yeah, so often the synovial joints, our true joints, have the cartilage covering, right?
Mm.
Yeah. And Katie, did you want to add something there?
I just said liquid. There needs to be some sort of sense of
Right. Yeah.
movability or sponginess or some, yeah.
Absolutely. You're hitting it there. Erna, you want to add on anything? I saw you unmute.
Oh, did I? Sorry, I was just thinking synovial fluid, but that doesn't sort of say much.
No, but that's exactly it. Yeah. So it's a synovial joint because it has synovial fluid. And so something that I think you know, but I'm going to say anyway, is that imagine it's a ball and socket, because that's easier to see. Let's say I painted this ball like all purple. I dipped into purple paint or something. My job as the bone coming in here is to move through the full range as if I'm trying to get my purple paint everywhere. And what that does then is it means I've had points of contact, pressure, that helps to secrete and then distribute all the synovial fluid. Okay, so your synovial fluid is kind of like the oil in your car. Okay, and the way I get it going, think of a car sitting there, there's no oil distributed throughout it. I have to have it running and moving for the oil to get going. So it's the same thing for us, is we need to actually have full range of motion. So what do joints need to be healthy? They need full range of motion. If I only moved in a smaller range of motion and I never pushed and secreted and distributed synovial fluid up here, this area of the joint would start to become, in a sense, dry. And that's where you get the things like an arthritic knee or hip when you're older, is that those joints have been starved of the nourishment of that synovial fluid. Okay, so we're lucky in a way, right? You know, think of people with their hips and knee replacements. If all they ever do is this, then they are not painting fully. If they squatted, they'd be a whole lot healthier, right? And by squatted, I mean squat a fair amount. Okay. In fact, I've done quite a bit of teaching over in China the last 2 years, and my squat has had to improve. I'm sure you can understand why. Because there, even in like the fanciest buildings that I was teaching in, like these, 50-story high-rise commercial buildings, they don't have toilets. No. They've got the, kind of the proverbial hole in the floor, and you've got to be able to squat well, or you're in trouble. And I couldn't squat. It would be really hard to squat where your heels lift up like in a grand plie, because then you're hanging out there kind of unstable. So I had to learn to actually squat heels down. And it was kind of a learning curve for my body. And I was like, oh, I've got no problem. I've been grand plieing my whole life. Yeah, but I haven't been squatting my whole life. They are different. And I had to learn to release in my hips a little bit more. And it was really good for me. And now I don't mind squatting whatsoever. So I encourage you to squat, and that goes for in your classes as well. To think that you're doing full range because you are doing grand plie is not actually a fully truthful statement. It's great to have that much range, but a squat is different. So I would encourage you to do actual squats. Okay, not even for muscle strength, but for that full synovial fluid in the hips, knees. And there's Tanya squatting away. And it feels good, right? Many people around the world hang out there. And we're actually meant to kind of hang out there if we have remained in that flexible state there. Okay, now we'll get into how to do that better when we talk about the pelvis, because there's probably something in the pelvis. If you're finding squatting a real challenge, don't just blame your hip joints or your knee joints or your, tight Achilles or something. It's often something that's not being allowed to happen in the pelvis. So that'll be next week. We'll get y'all more squatting next week, okay? Now, let's look at a little bit more to do with the design of the spine itself, okay? So it's got all these jobs to do. Now, if you look at it from the back view, it looks a lot just like a column. And actually, I even use my arm as an example, where it's thicker at the base and then it gets narrower as it comes up, kind of like an obelisk even. Okay, so it's a very stable thing. Having the thicker base and then the narrower to the top makes it stable. And then when we look at the pelvis, you'll see that that's like an inverted triangle underneath it. And I've got a picture for that coming up. Okay, but if we look at it from the side view, well, ta-da, it's got some curves, right? Now, these curves sometimes are harder to see with all the soft tissue in the body, okay? Like the lumbar curve is actually probably bigger than you might think. And I know for me, returning my curve in my rib cage was huge. To actually have what's lordosis, kyphosis often are used as terms to mean like too much or something, but they're really just the terms of saying, oh, it's a lordosis, it's a kyphosis, it's a lordosis. Okay, and to actually return that, that's where most dancers, we really over flatten in the thoracic. Okay, so it's got all these curves, and that's going to be our big focus for today. Okay, we're going to look at now the design of why those curves started to happen. So let's say I'm an animal, I'm a cat or a cheetah, and I've got my spine kind of like a suspension bridge, and I've got my limbs coming down here. And I just kind of, I go along the savannah, contracting, going around like that. Pretty effective. They've got their head out there, and they are able to move with great, great speed on their four legs. Now let's look at what the design of the human is. Well, what if we kept the same design as a mammal? And we said, we're going to be upright now on only two legs. Is that going to work? Maybe like see it all already sag over. My head would be looking at the ground. I wouldn't see anything. I'd be totally lunch meat for something like almost immediately because I wouldn't know where to go. All right. So just going like this and going, oh, okay, is this going to work? No. It starts to sag. And in fact, if you look at, say, the apes and gorillas of the world, where you kind of say maybe they're an intermediary between, is they've got massive spine muscles to try to hold themselves up. Massive, massive spine muscles. Much more than a human does, or most other animals. Okay, so go, well, all right, what works for mammals doesn't work for us. Okay, well, now that we're upright, what if we decided, I'm going to use my smaller one. What if we decided to just be upright then? Is this going to work? Anybody see problems with this one? Yeah, okay. Or now what would be the problems with this one?
There's no shock absorption as such.
Yeah, there's a heck of a lot of compression. Boom, 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 crash, right? And conversely, so we've got the compression down, but we'd also have the ground force coming up. There'd be no shock absorption and our head would be, right? Yeah, so being perfectly upright doesn't work. What else is the problem with being perfectly upright? Go ahead, Tanya. Yeah.
Just saying, wouldn't be able to actually do anything. You couldn't lean forward. You couldn't sit down. You couldn't, because there's no. So we would just be standing there.
Just, hello. Maybe you've got some neck rotation. You're just like, yeah, there'd be nothing you can really do. Now, remember too, one of the things about why we have the spine that we have is for muscle and organ attachments. So I guess if we're not really moving, we don't need a lot of muscles, but we still might need to have our organs. So what's going to happen with our organs? How are we going to put these on us? Are we going to like, you know, just stick your heart here and maybe a lung back here and okay, let's put a kidney here, but we'll hang the liver here. Be like a darn Christmas tree, which is this little stick with all these organs hanging off of it. That's not going to work. That also makes me really vulnerable to attack, right? Because the good old mammals, when they're here, all of their heart and lungs down here, all their internal organs are here. Their tail even protects their genitals and anus and all that. So they are very protected with all of their organs. And you know, if you've had a cat or a dog, it's only when they trust you that they flip over and go, you can, you know, touch my vulnerable belly, right? But we'd be going along going, sure, yeah, kick my kidney, kick my belly, doesn't matter, whatever, they're all just hanging off here. So we know this doesn't work. So what do we do? What did Mother Nature, evolution, God, what have you? What was the brilliant design? So let's go from the animal version, go, okay, if we go to here, well, this isn't going to work. Oh, and I forgot to mention, don't forget propagating the species. How exactly are we going to have a big baby hanging here without, that's not going to work at all, right? Okay, so here we go. We've got our mammal spine trying to come upright and going, well, this isn't going to work. So the first thing we want to do is get our head back over our base of support and able to look out. Ta-da, you now have a cervical curve. So that's already a better. But again, I'd have the problem of baby and all that, particularly. So how about I put another curve there? Oh, hang on. Got to get my hand gestures down here. That looks lumpy. Just a sec. Okay. So cervical. I'm going to go a little lower, and then I push into the lumbar curve. Yeah. So now I've got a place for the baby to be. Actually, sorry, here would be all my internal organs and my lungs and stuff. And then down there, I've got a place for the baby to be, where if, as the baby develops, I would just arch a little bit more. Right? Or perhaps lean back. You've seen ladies do that, of course. All right, so let me go through that one more time. So the brilliant design is, let's get our parts stacked over our base of support. Let's be able to see the horizon. Let's have these cavities almost for creation of safety of internal organs and support. They're still pretty vulnerable by being at the front of us. Okay, but now we can see and got our arms and can protect ourselves. And let's have a lumbar curve for the sake of adding all this additional shock absorption and weight of baby. Okay, and I'm sure that makes sense now. You're like, oh, okay, so we have all these curves.